Hello everybody and welcome to Permanent Waves. Today we're going to be starting our discography review of the band Stratovarius, a Finnish power metal band who was very important in the development of power metal in the 90s and still retains some pretty good prominence today. Their history is full of a lot of interesting personnel changes, quite a few sound changes, and a lot of high quality records that will appeal to anybody who are fans of power metal and even some kind of dark fantasy tinged progressive metal. So with this first episode, we're going to cover the band's first 10 or so years of existence, their first few records, formative years, and eventually the introduction of their full-time vocalist with their fourth record. Enjoy!
Well, if I can ask you first, sir, what's your history with Stratovarius? I'm coming into this new. It's thanks to you that you pushed them, not push them, but you gave us but it was a suggestion from you, and I was like,
okay.
Why not?
Let's see. Honest.
This is true. But hey, you know what? I've never really turned anything down from you, and so I enjoy these guys, obviously. But I want to know what's your history with them, because you're the one that suggested we do this. So it's like, where does this start with you?
Very good. Thank you for the prompt. So for me and for this group in particular, I remember I was about 10 years ago, I was getting into the whole power metal scene. I like and for those who don't know, power metal refers to a subgenre of metal music in which case the tempos tend to be very fast. The songs are really epic. The choruses are really huge. Kind of like an Iron Maiden on steroids, or Judas Priest on steroids, if you will. And obviously me being in college, playing a lot of D&D, I love that. There's nothing not to like about that. And so I was looking at the big names in the genre, and of course in the 90s, Stratovarius is one of the big ones. And because that was kind of the golden era for a lot of power metal bands. Like Blind Guardian, Gamma Ray were huge in that time period. And first Stratovarius album I listened to, we'll be getting to it soon, was Episode, which is kind of seen as near the beginning of that golden era period. And to be honest, there were some songs back then that I was exactly what I was looking for, and others not so much. And I kind of have a bit more of a reason for that now. We'll get into that a bit further as we keep talking. But from that point on, they were kind of always in my head, and I came back to them periodically. And then lately, getting more into kind of the more progressive metal genre, I saw more of an appeal with the band, and I'll get more into that as well. But yeah, so then I just found that there was a lot more depth in their songwriting than I initially thought, and it got me more into it. And that's how I get into music, is I'll like an album or two, and then I just buy the whole discography and hope for the best. So anyway, yeah. And then I just found myself gradually trying to track down all their records. A Finnish band, not always easy to find their back catalog in this part of the world, but I tracked down most of it. So yeah, and I've obviously enjoyed it enough to recommend it to you as a full Discog. So
yeah, I agree with that. That's a good, wonderful idea. I think thanks to certain music streaming platforms, depending on which one we're talking about, it's nice that hopefully, fingers crossed, that some of them put out all those albums that you may not potentially be able to get physically in case they're just not available anymore and the demand is very high. I'm happy it came that way for you.
Well, there was an issue in the sense of tracking down a copy of Visions, for example. For whatever reason, Spotify didn't have it for the longest time. So if for whatever reason, Tidal has it now. But now, as far as I know, everything's available on streaming services at this point in time. Anyway, without further ado, I want to introduce one more aspect of this conversation here. We're going to talk about the picks. So we're going to have three kind of albums we single out here. We're going to have best record overall at the very end, of course. Best for new listeners, and most representative of the discography as a whole. Because our goal here is, of course, to spotlight artists that we think are excellent and worth listening to, and kind of give everyone the best chance of getting into them.
Yeah, if I could ask you quickly though,
Sure.
Before we go any further, what is your physically wise? Where's your outlet? Where's your collection? What does your collection look like right now with Stratovarius?
I think I'm missing the very first 2 or 3. I'm missing the 2 elements and the self-titled, and of course the intermission ones. But aside from that, I've got everything else either on CD, but with the exception of the 2 newest ones, Eternal and Survive, on vinyl.
No, that answers my question. Very nice. Other than listening to it on the internet. So let us commence, Johnny. Take us away.
All right, so the very beginning of the band, we can trace their humblest beginnings back to as early as 1984, 85, at which point they were known as Blackwater, different band name entirely, formed by guitarist Timo Tolkki and a few of his friends. That's the most important name to note at this point because Stratovarius has gone through an insane amount of lineup changes and past members at this point, there are no original members left in the band. But after 1985, they were known as Stratovarius. But it would take until another 4 years in 1989 when the first album, Fright Night, would be released. At this point in time, it was very much Timo Tolkki's project, and it would be for quite a while, where he was not only the lead guitarist, he was also doing vocals for the band. And he wasn't the most trained of singers, and that's kind of the biggest hallmark of this early era of the band, was that Tolkki was, it goes without saying, and we would see further on the discography, an absolutely astounding guitar player, especially in the lead department. But as a vocalist, he is an untrained singer, and it shows, especially on Fright Night. Fright Night itself is a competent album for the time period, but for 1989, as a power metal record, it doesn't stand out quite as much as you would hope for a debut, because 1989 was after a few of the genre staples, namely Halloween's Keeper of the Seven Keys had been released, where that kind of laid the groundwork for the entire genre. And a lot of that stuff kind of outplays a lot of what's on Fright Night, and with much, much better vocals. So it wasn't exactly the most astounding opening statement a band could have, but it's still a fun listen. It sounds like a bunch of young guys, like very much like Metallica's Kill 'Em All, a bunch of young guys getting together and just playing what they want to play and having fun.
I agree. I think it's a good opening statement. Maybe not opening statement. I don't know if it's a thesis or whatnot, but definitely you gotta break the mold somehow. You gotta break through into the industry somehow. And so to do that, maybe you gotta throw a lot of things out there. You get your influences. You just do what you could, and you build from there. So I'm not calling it a demo track. I did enjoy it, but boy, yeah, like listening to this, and then I think listening to the next 2 albums, they definitely progress.
Yes, and that's the most important thing. Well, Fright Night is kind of the opening statement. It doesn't quite have the variety and the personality we would see from the band going forward, which is why the next album, Twilight Time, which is released 3 years later, is such a good step ahead, because this is where, to me, I kind of got back into the band after I listened to them for a while, was where they began to get distinctive. Because Stratovarius did something that a lot of power metal bands at this time weren't doing, was that they had a more complex darkness lying underneath and more of a neoclassical influence. So as opposed to just playing extremely fast all the time and just trying to have that Iron Maiden-esque kind of gallop, they tried to diversify their songwriting by slowing down and by being darker. In Twilight Times, we have a lot of stuff like this, like Madness. Look at the song titles this time around. The Hills Have Eyes, Madness Strikes at Midnight. Things get a lot more menacing sounding here, and it's very much for the best. There are some absolute gems of songs on this one.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if this is, forgive me if I don't fully remember all the inner details between each track, but was this where they originally, or not originally, was this where they introduced the harpsichord usage, or is that later on?
That's much more prominent later on, and in another well-received album we'll get to in about 4 years' time at this point.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but yeah, this one I think is definitely marked, and the cover art too. The cover art of Fright Night is just like a snake in a graveyard, which is not really indicative of the vision that Tolkki had for the band at the time, which was much more cosmic and kind of much larger. Whereas Twilight Time, we're seeing more of a darker, spacey, planetary aesthetic that would come along, and that would stay with Stratovarius for a lot of their career. So this is where we see a band coming into its own, and we also start to see more of a duality with Tolkki's vocals in the sense that when he screams, not necessarily screams, but when he's not like death metal screaming per se, but when he goes for more of a higher, harsh sound, much resembling Dickinson from Iron Maiden or Halford from Judas Priest, he does quite well. And those are his best moments. It's when he tries to slow things down and kind of relying on his singing is where the cracks begin to show. Because no matter how hard he tries, he's still not a trained singer at this point.
But what I like is, I can only say this for as we go on, but he keeps improving though. I think
Yes.
within like each album that we see him put out, or at least see the band put out, you could tell that potentially there is some improvement from the last album. I don't just mean that, with tracks or anything like that. I just mean like, yeah, you could, I did feel, or I did hear, I remember, listening to Fright Night, and then like by, episodes, just throwing it out there. There was definitely a big significant difference between like vocally, and also with, not just vocals, but also like the lyrics.
Okay, you might have forgotten a little detail after that goes in, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I don't know if I told you this, or I don't know how much history I discussed with you beforehand, but there's a very important reason for that. It's all good. We'll discuss that. But yes, I do agree, especially by the time we hit Dream Space. And now we'll get to the third album, and this is the last album of what I call the Tolkien era. And this is the last album where he's actually on lead vocals, is what I was getting at.
Oh yes, that's so
it's an entirely different guy at this point.
I forgot you mentioned that before. My apologies. Whoops.
No worries.
Egg in the face. Oh well, it is what it is.
It's all good. But yeah, at this point we do see him. He's becoming a lot more confident with his vocals and his songwriting. It's getting a lot more ambitious. Tracks are getting a lot longer. There's a lot more variety. It's getting more adventurous, and this is exactly what we want to see. Yeah, we see the songwriting getting more darker. We see more risks being taken. This is Dream Space. The cover art's much darker. The choruses are bigger. There's more Middle Eastern scales being used, especially on that Magic Carpet Ride.
Yes,
track.
I definitely remember that.
That was cool.
I was like, what the hey is that? That was amazing as well. And yeah, especially like the first two tracks, if I may say so, like we have Chasing Shadows and the Fourth Reich. I was like, my goodness, like they're making a statement there. They're like telling you, oh, we're thinking bigger. And I'm like, all right, let's hear it. And I was very impressed with this one.
Yes, definitely. This is a lot of people who aren't actually that big fans of Stratovarius. Dream Space is still very loved among a lot of fans, because it's the last Stratovarius record to really go this far with the dark, kind of spacey, progressive rock kind of atmosphere. None of the other records quite sound as dark as this one, and there's not a lot of progressive power metal, which is that sounds like this. The closest being early Conception, like Parallel Minds or In Your Multitude, is that I found. It's a really unique sound, and part of me, as much as I really love what came afterwards, because that's like landmark classic Stratovarius, I really kind of wish there was more of this. Because yeah, Chasing Shadows after Madness Strikes at Midnight is probably my favorite Tolkien era song. Yeah, Fourth Reich, Eyes of the World. Like We Are the Future. There's a lot of great, not only power metal anthems on here that would get the fists up in an arena setting. I'd really love to see this record re-recorded with Cold Pelto on vocals. That'd be really cool.
Yes, no, that'd be interesting to see the modern crew do this one.
Well, I got a little tidbit on that whole thing that we'll get into a bit later on when it's more relevant. With Dream Space, we wrap up the initial Tolkien era of the band, and at this point in time, this is a guy who's been trying to run this band by himself essentially for quite some time. I mean, yeah, he has other band members, but he's the most active in all the writing and just about all the lyrics by himself, with a bit of help here and there. So it's at this time where Tolkien decides a new change of direction is needed. So he makes a pretty drastic decision and steps down from the vocals, and he hires Timo Kotapelto, someone else who has the exact same first name as him, which is not confusing at all going forward to talk about. And then 1 year later, we get the Fourth Dimension record, which shows him taking a step back and focusing entirely on his guitar playing, which not a problem because there are some wicked solos and wicked riffs on this record. And now we have the much more trained singer, Timo Kotapelto, on vocal duties. And honestly, classic era, this one's really up there for me because it still has remnants of, not quite as the degree of Dream Space, but it still has a touch of that darkness to it while moving in a much more confident, much more power metal direction. This has the makings of an early masterpiece to me. The songs are much longer too. They're like a Twilight Symphony, We Hold the Key. There's a lot to like about this record. I think it's a step above Dream Space because it just has the confidence of Kotapelto on vocals, just makes for better melodies, stronger choruses, and just an overall more well-rounded band. I think this is a fantastic direction for them to go in at this point.
Yeah, what this is to me is I will not say remake. Obviously, I can't. But this is the new era. So if the era ended with Dream Space, and now the band has a new direction going with them, and the hiring of a new vocalist, this means that the former vocalist, he can now devote time to guitar playing in the band, and so I feel like this is a good like introduction, and or at least a good starting point for the new era. And again, I think this is like a good mission statement of like, okay, this is like we were experimenting. Not I say experimenting, but this is the direction we're going beforehand. Now we want to change it up a bit. We want to like try something new. So it's like like we have maybe some remnants of pieces of ourselves from beforehand, but here's like this is what we're gonna like do from here on out.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a good way of putting it. This is the beginning of a new era, 100%. And we still have some remnants of that darkness left. And 030366 has some weird little almost electronic and almost computery sounding influences in it as well, which adds to that darkness. But for the most part, this is the band moving away from the sound they kind of almost perfected with Dream Space and going in a different direction. And I think personally it was a great choice. But Toki, like you say, also is now able to focus mostly on his guitar playing. He still handles most of the lyrics, but you can see the writing credits of Kota Pelto as a vocalist. Makes sense, he's singing the stuff, stepping up and writing the lyrics as well. And the instrumentals are getting better. This Fourth Dimension also has the band named instrumental Stratovarius on it. And it's where he really Toki starts to showcase a lot of his soloing, which goes without saying. He was ranked as one of the fastest guitarists of all time. It shows the guy can shred. At the moment, we have one major player yet to enter the band, and he does so in the next record, and it shows once again. So this is a band almost reaching their zenith to me. Not quite there. It doesn't quite have the consistency all the way through the record, but we're so close.
Yeah, nothing to add. No, cool. Let's keep going.
And with Fourth Dimension, we finished the band's early formative years. Now with Timo Kotapelto on board, they would carry on to their golden era and release a string of classic, highly revered power metal records. But this wouldn't last for long, and we'll cover that in the few coming episodes. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time in Stratovarius Part 2.